Hi, this is Dawn Marie Solis with EQ Solutions, and I am so honored to be here with Dr. Kimberly Douglass. I have been getting to know Dr. Douglass a little bit over the last few weeks and diving into her work and seeing the really excellent things that she's doing on behalf of neurodivergent people. And I am thrilled to have this opportunity to speak with you, Dr. Douglass. You are neurodivergent yourself, is that correct?
I am
Yay.
ADHD on the spectrum and complex PTSD.
Okay. I'm sorry that we share that last one in common.
Yes.
That's that's never a celebrated welcome to the party, but welcome to the party.
Yes.
Uh, you also you were a tenured professor,
Hmm.
and you needed to do some other things with your life, and you left academia, and since you have been supporting your neurodivergent child, you have been co-founding and running a school, you have become a coach and for neurodivergent business people. I mean, I'm so blown away and inspired, and I can't wait to hear more
Okay.
about who you are and what you're trying to accomplish and how maybe people could help.
Sure. And thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. So, yes, I am myself neurodivergent, and I walked away from a tenured position in academia from a research intensive university because I needed to make some changes for my family. There were needs, our needs that my son has that school is just not built to accommodate and to take care of. And so since 2016, when he entered pre-K, it became very clear to me that we were going to have to patch a lot of things together because the system is not set up to support the needs that he has. And so it just didn't make sense to me. And it felt like it felt like having a second job actually, and I thought that I could manage it, I could outsmart it, I could outmaneuver it, I could outplan it. And when he got to about the fourth grade, it was like, no, I can't do this anymore. So we moved to another city to get resources with a little bit of success. But because most traditional environments, even if they say they're set up to support certain needs, if it's still a traditional environment, it is playing into certain aspects of our society that wants children to be a certain way. And so we had to experiment with several things. And by 2020, I had run into a person who was interested in establishing democratic school where it's actually student centered, and a lot of people say that, but this is actually a student centered school. She wanted to start a school, so I was a consultant to starting the Pearl Remote Democratic High School, and I am still a board member there. And my son attended school there for 2 years with great success. It's a school where they don't even get grades, they get narratives, in a school that really teaches children how to think. Most of the children who go there are neurodivergent, surprise, surprise. And after 2 years, he decided he wanted the traditional public school experience. And so we're now back doing IEPs, so an individualized education program. And that's been a whole thing. But also, while I was in academia, I moved to another university. I was an administrator at that university, actually at both universities. And it just became clear to me in 2019, and this was before I became aware of my own neurodivergence. It just became clear to me that I could never live out any vision I had for myself working in an organization, right? Because the organization's needs always come first. And also, just academia is not the most welcoming environment for people with multiple marginalized identities. And some of that complex PTSD that, we talked about earlier, it came from working. in academia and experiences there that just didn't make sense to me. But I recognized in 2019 it's not something that I could do long term for my own health. So I was sort of sandwiched between systems that were not serving my child and then systems that were not serving me. And not just not serving, but oppressive systems that were harmful to both of us. And so I started working full time for myself in 2019, and it's been challenging. It's been interesting. Over time, the space that I've worked myself into is being a coach and consultant to neurodivergent entrepreneurs and really doing it a different way than other coaches do it. So a lot of people talk about I can get you to 10K months and you need this system and that system. But if you're neurodivergent, there's some things that have to happen first. Like we have to talk about how your neurodivergence shows up in the way you work. Are you a visionary or are you an implementer? So that determines whether you need help from a visionary or somebody who's going to help you implement. Um, how do you reconcile the fact that you're so prolific and you have so many ideas? And so I can talk to you a little bit more about language that I use with clients, once we get deeper into the conversation. But I work with neurodivergent entrepreneurs. I'm also a digital content creator, so I create a lot on TikTok. And my content, I don't use like pithy quotes, whatever. It is affirming in that I pick out patterns and truths and state them. And hopefully people will they resonate with people, and they have over the past couple of years. So I'm a content creator there, but also I have digital products. So I have a book called Decolonizing Neurodivergence. I'm working on the second book, working on my second book, my second edition of the Neurodivergent Entrepreneur. I have workbooks and I have journals and different ways to engage people who have ADHD, autism, complex PTSD, learning disabilities, etc. And then also, I am a futurist because where my work is taking me is to really talk about neurodiversity. Because if you can talk about neurodiversity, it opens up the conversation so much wider. And it also shows that because of things like racial constructs, there's so much of the conversation that we are not actually having. So, and I think we may have talked about this a little bit, but one of the things that I want to do, and I can share more detail as we go along, is to start my own institute and a future focused institute. So I'm a futurist. A lot of the information that you hear about futurism and futurist studies are about technology, and that's actually being a technologist. What that fails to do is to talk about how we are going to shift the power dynamics in society. It's just talking about how the same people are going to get bigger toys. And I don't want to talk about how the same people are going to get bigger toys. I want to talk about, for example, how Black women are uniquely positioned to be futurist because we have to be the design thinkers. We have to be the people that work around other things that are happening in society. So in the present, I'm working with neurodivergent people, and that's also part of my future as well, towards a broader conversation about neurodiversity and about what our needs are going to be in the future.
I love all of that, and it makes me so excited. Um,
Yay!
I have so many questions running around in my head. I think maybe the first one would be just for clarity for any audience who may not be familiar with the term futurist. Could
Okay.
you give a quick definition for that?
So a futurist is a person who looks at the data, looks across the landscape of society, and they look for patterns. And actually, a lot of autistic people would probably fall in this category because a lot of us are pattern readers, and so we do it naturally, even we don't recognize that's what we're doing. But we futurists look across like comparing, merging data, putting data sets together, whether we do it officially or intentionally, but looking at the numbers, what are the numbers telling us? What are we reading when we think about the trends that are happening? What do the trends indicate to us? What do they signify to us? What are the social markers that we're going to look at? How do we project? How do we predict what things are going to be like 2 to 3 years from now based upon what the numbers are telling us today? But the thing is about people, institutions that call themselves futurist are also some of the same people creating the future. So it's not necessarily that they're reading the data so much as creating the data. So Zillow, for example, they can tell you that they're reading the data, they understand the projections. It's because not only are they collecting the data, but they are also creating the market in which the market that the data are being collected about. And so a true futurist is somebody who can read the tea leaves, look at the patterns, predict what is happening, or what project what is going to happen, and see what the trends are going to be, or use the trends to determine how things are moving.
And your background is in systems, right?
It is. So my tenure is in information science. And so when I was publishing peer-reviewed material, I did it on information policy, government information. I taught a government information class, public infrastructure, things like that. So I am a systems thinker, meaning that I look at how all these pieces come together and form what we deem to be reality. And so when people we start to talk about like these complex issues we have in society, yeah, so there's the interpersonal stuff and how you and I are relating to each other. But I tend to look at how it's been set up for that relationship to function this way. Who benefits? What system benefits from this relationship functioning in this way?
So, if I'm understanding you correctly and well, I can see how somebody deeply rooted in uh, systems and data and functionality and A to B to C, linear thinking, and all of that can help somebody who's neurodivergent, who will use me as an example because I'm the topic I know best. Right? Where I just posted a TikTok just an hour or so ago talking about how I haven't filled out really important paperwork because my printer needs ink. Except it's not because my printer needs ink. It's because there's stuff in the way of the printer. Except
Right.
it's not that. There's other stuff that's in the way of the stuff. Then there's other, right? So I would need somebody like you to help me back up,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You think you can't put ink in your printer. That's
Right.
not it. There's something way back here in the way you're processing
Right.
that's actually the thing in the way. It's just landing in an obvious space of, well, I still haven't put ink in the printer, right?
And
So you could help somebody find that line
yes.
and how to
Yes.
figure that out. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes I'm that person. Like I'm the person that can't because there's something sitting in the way of it. Um, so, and I'm gonna go back even further and say that when I'm helping people, entrepreneurs, even saying that it's okay to think differently about why things are not happening. Like some people, it's like, oh, I need to print this out and I just can't. And so it starts the shame spiral. But if we start in a neutral place where it's not happening, okay, it's not happening. All right. So it's just like you did. So why is it not happening? So it's not the big thing that isn't happening. It's that little thing that gets you to the big thing that's not happening. And so just even giving people the permission to reframe what is happening in front of them is a huge accomplishment for them. Um, and what it does is it opens up the conversation to talk about what kind of support they need in their business. So, one of the things I realized from talking to people on social media is just like people could have a whole different realities if their needs were being supported in a different way. So, even their expectations of how they should be supported would be different. I did like one of the posts that really blew up my account was about an ADHD tax. And I think I put it as a neurodivergent tax, and another creator rephrased it as like an ADHD tax specifically. And the answers that we got on that video, the responses to that video were amazing. And it just shows how, because most of us, we live in nuclear families, we're very isolated, we don't have the community we need. If we had that kind of support as business owners, but as human beings, our realities would look very different.
Oh my, yes. It's something that is part of every calculation for every day that I
Mm-hmm.
live. The things that I need support on, that I don't have support for,
Mm-hmm.
make everything else that I do harder and
Right.
sometimes impossible.
Right.
And so it's not that what I need is exceptional, right? Lots of people need some assistance in different places in their life,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are pointed at my basement door because my living room needs to be picked up, right? I
And
need
I got
help.
the green screen curtain.
um, there are things that uh, overwhelm my ability to prioritize,
Right.
and I get locked down in a type of paralysis. And it has nothing to do with my willingness
Nope.
to do
Nope.
the work. It has nothing to do with my desire to do the work. It has to do with, in part, I'm like you, Dr. Douglas. I didn't know I was neurodivergent until about uh, 2019, might have been a little 2019, maybe 2018. Um, so it's been a really speedy journey to catch
Mm-hmm.
up
Mm-hmm.
to all the things I haven't understood about myself, about my kids. My kids were also not diagnosed growing up. They're now all adults. We're all dealing with the fallout from not understanding
Yeah.
our identity,
Yeah.
um, and not
One
understanding how we could have better supported each other as a family unit.
one of the things that just grates on my nerves, when when people say stuff like, you just need to change your mindset. No, no, that's not what we're talking about. And that's why, going back to the whole thing about futurism, we can't have an honest conversation about futurism and what the world will look like in the future. So people will say things like, "Oh, neurodivergence is the future," and I thought about that for a while, and I was like, "No, it can't be the future if it's not the present." And in the present, we do not respect the fact that people need so many different things. People have different needs. And just telling somebody to shift their mindset, number one, it is a very colonized kind of way of looking at things, kind of a tenet of white supremacy in that you're individualistic, you're supposed to just fix it yourself, you're supposed to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. In a futuristic view in which we imagine a different world for ourselves, that doesn't help us. If we're not talking about what our needs are and talking about how the community can help us meet those needs, then we're just talking about recreating struggles for people. That's all we're talking about. Recreating struggles for people in technology.
In that line of, we can't have in the future what we don't currently understand or respect now.
Mm-hmm.
There is, in my view, an abusiveness to our society for any any sign that you might need a thing.
Right.
Right down to, if I am cold, while others are not. They feel welcome to shame me
Yes.
because I feel a way that they do not,
Right.
right? If I am tired when others are not, they feel welcome to shame me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the amount of permission some people feel they have to reject a person's humanity because they need something
Mm-hmm.
is baked into our systems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We are taught it at every level.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons why I got so excited about being introduced to the fact that you exist on the planet is because you speak to these ills in our society, these sicknesses in our
Mm-hmm.
society, in ways that don't pull any punches. I think it's important that we get, when I say I think, I mean it.
Mm-hmm.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I am like,
Mm-hmm.
right? I may think a thing, but I can think it differently, right? So it's my opinion. It feels like my experience that being told over and over and over again that you're not enough
Mm-hmm.
if you need a thing. And it is my perception, because it is not my lived experience, it is my perception that that gets exponentially more difficult if you are any shade darker than me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you come from some other place than the British Isles or Northern Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it starts becoming exponentially harder to have a need and not be ground under the boot of disregard, disrespect, shame, and disgust.
Yeah. So and I talk about this in my first book on decolonizing neurodivergence, if your existence in this country or whatever country is believed to serve other people, for example, Black women, we are most of society believes that we are here to serve. And so it is difficult for people to hear the needs that we have. And because what that requires is a level of dehumanization. And if you do not have humanity, then you do not have needs that are worth empathizing with. So this is why you have so many Black women who, first of all, we don't fully understand what autism is because we haven't really studied a diverse group enough, a group enough with enough diversity to understand how it shows up in different places. And so the research is not there. But for the research that is there, that is hardly ever recommended as a diagnosis for Black women or considered as a diagnosis for Black women because you just need to shut up and get back to work. So there's no room for that conversation. And that speaks to the first book, but the book that I'm working on now, I talk about managing and leading. So in the first book, I talked about how in our society, it really is about extracting from people. So how do you make it so that it's easy as possible to extract from people? And so when you are trying to manage people, that is about extracting every last resource possible from them. But leading is about creating systems that allow you to see the needs that people have. And what we have lived in is a system that is based on management. It is based on extracting resources from people in different ways and dividing people up into groups so that you can extract in different ways, some by force, some by convincing them that you need to extract from them. So like there's this video going around the internet of this guy bragging about working 80 hours a week. He is willingly saying exploit me, whereas some people it's more coercive. But the thing is to extract every last drop, every last dime to the point of disability or to the point of death. And in fact, in going back to the first book, one of the basic ideas there is that to call somebody neurodivergent or to say they have ADHD or autism or to say that they are Black, yes, autism is a diagnosis, ADHD is a diagnosis, it is a medical understanding that goes along with it. But what those categories also are worker categories. They're telling me how long I can sit at a desk, how long I can participate in an activity. And it looks like we get more and more neurodivergent the older we get. But what it is the demands from the systems on us are getting greater and greater and greater and greater until the point where something has to give. Like it has to hit a wall. And so going back to what you were saying about the needs, right? And it becomes like you're putting people out by even saying that you have needs or you want to do something different from them. And I'm saying, stop. This can't continue if we don't have a way to identify what our actual needs are. And I started thinking about this as an advocate for my child because when we go to school meetings, they would talk about behavior, behavior, behavior as a way of managing and controlling. They did not talk about needs. I have to force them, have to force them to talk about what the needs are. Because what they end up doing, whether they intentionally do it or not, and this is baked into the system, is they create a record of criminalization by talking about behavior as opposed to talking about what the needs actually are. So if it's about behavior, then that's his responsibility. But if we're starting to talk about needs, that's their responsibility. And they don't want that responsibility.
Yeah, I think the way this is recording is when you're talking, people can see you, and when I'm talking, people can see me. So they are not
Okay.
seeing my like emphatic head nodding agreement. So I just want to state emphatic head nodding agreement with everything you just said. Um, I didn't understand my children's needs. My
Mm,
oldest, who is now 30, was the problem child.
mm,
In the way that they were too smart for their own good and had no stomach, no patience for people who were teachers who didn't actually know their subject.
mm-hmm.
They were actually fine if the teacher didn't know their subject, if the teacher was honest.
Yes.
But the second the teacher tried to pretend they knew something that they didn't, or acted like a question wasn't relevant or was problematic, exposing a lack of knowledge,
Yes.
my child was done. Done. Right? No more homework, no more participation, not going to that class. Done. Because in their neurodivergent mind, I show up where I am respected.
Right.
I
Right.
do not show up where I
Right.
am not respected. And as a white individual, did not have the same kind of consequences
Mm-hmm.
that somebody of color would have had
Mm-hmm.
with that attitude.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that there weren't consequences, there were significant consequences.
Sure, of course.
It led to them not being able to finish school
Mm-hmm.
uh, and having exceptional amounts of trauma that at 30
Yes.
years old is still being worked out
Yes. Yep.
with teachers telling this individual that they are all kinds of horrible things.
So, and I talked to you earlier about the workbooks I have, and there's a workbook I have. I actually call it a heart workbook, and it's a personal transformation workbook for teachers. And the one thing I emphasize, whether it's like working with parents or working with teachers, is about the connection with the child. And so one of the things I've noticed with my own child and with other children who are on the spectrum, if they have ADHD, any child, if you refuse real connection and you want to show them how smart you are, or you're trying to camouflage something, that is going to burn somebody in the situation. More than likely the child, because you have authority, as a teacher, have authority. But if you have no intention, like I told you about the school that my son went to that was supposed to provide extra support needs. It doesn't matter what's on their website and how glossy their website is if the teachers do not intend to connect with him. It
Right.
it, it is very relationship based. Um, and so through the relationship, you start to see the needs. And so we talk about the broader community. What we're talking about is internal healing for ourselves, but also healing for our communities. And quite frankly, learning how to be in communities because we don't have a manual. We don't have very good guides for it. I want to go back a little bit, and we were talking about behavior and needs.
Mm.
I put out a video, it's probably been like 2 years now. Time, this is like, ugh, where I talk about there is a huge overlap or relationship between black boys being on the school to prison pipeline and white women being late diagnosed ADHD or autism. And here's what the connection is it is about putting behavior ahead of need. So, with regard to the school to prison pipeline, schools are creating their ledgers, they're documenting things so that they can show how this behavior justifies the consequences that certain people get. So there's a performance there. But there's also a performance with white girls. So they get rewarded for a lot of time access to gifted education for behaving very well and being polite and being mannerable and trying to make things or being like a high achiever until they can't do it anymore. And then they hit a wall and it's like, well, what the hell just happened? Why is this happening? I don't know. There are different consequences for those two different groups, very different consequences, very different outcomes, but they both are about putting behavior over the needs of the person. Like you can't even see the needs. There's a pathway to prison, so it doesn't matter what their needs are. Or we need for you to behave to make our whole story stick together, so it doesn't matter what your needs are. And in both cases, the needs are being ignored, but with different outcomes, different consequences for those groups.
Both sets of consequences landing heavily in the abuse category.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
One of the things that I have talked about because of my own past is not understanding the way I think and process, and
Mm-hmm.
that culture that you're talking about, that there was no tolerance for me, and this is literal, to even breathe wrong, quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote wrong,
Mm-hmm.
right? If somebody asked me to do something and I took a deep breath, which I'm likely to do, I think it's a stim, right? It's a little bit of a transition thing. I have to take a deep breath and then I move. It was punished
Right.
because I had an attitude.
Yes. Yes.
And my little autistic self created a situation where I barely breathed
Mm-hmm.
for fear of being misunderstood and
Right.
punished. That mindset made me prime target for physical, emotional, and sexual abuse.
Absolutely. 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 You are a much greater likelihood of being victimized by somebody in a physical abusive way. And it's just really interesting, or not interesting, sad. Um, like, you had to figure out a way to survive in that moment. And and then on the other side, when my son takes a breath, it's like, oh, you're expelled for 2 days or suspended for 2 days.
Yeah.
And so then that starts like this whole thing. And in both cases, what you see is you don't have, the point is you don't have needs. You don't deserve to have needs. And so now, as an adult, and you've, not you specifically, but the general white women who are treated that way, so it's like also holding other people to that same standard and telling other people they don't have needs and stop begging, and it removes the empathy from the situation.
Attention grabbing,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? When you ask for a need to be met, you are intention seeking,
Right.
and that's the polite stuff, right? And then there's all
Yeah.
kinds of impolite,
Right.
shamey language around that, right? Um, I heard a statistic yesterday as a repeat. This is a statistic I've heard, unfortunately, from several sources, that there are as many or more Black people in prison right now than there were at the height of slavery in this country.
Mhm.
And that pathway for for the Black individual born male, but also for Black individuals born female,
Mhm.
um, that pathway was paved
Mhm.
when slavery abolition happened.
Yes.
We can no longer own you.
Right.
Therefore, we will criminalize you, and we will write into the system, into the law, that slavery is allowed within the barbed wire.
Right. Right. It never left.
No, it never left, but it has become so. Um, I'm not sure I have the right words, so please help me if you can. That it's become so part of the system,
Mhm.
right? So let's take the gears of a traditional clock.
Mhm.
What we see is the face of the clock and the hands and maybe a second hand, but we don't see all the inner workings going behind unless something breaks.
Mhm.
And then we might dig in there and try to replace a gear or a cog,
Right.
right? But in general, we're just watching the time go around. That's that's what has become of white society. We see our experience. We
Mhm.
see the face of the clock. The hands are moving.
Mhm.
Everything's fine.
Mhm.
We don't see what has created the hands moving. We don't see the blood, the
Right.
abuse, the end of life, the struggle, the strife that
Right.
is turning those hands.
Yeah. The disability, the disablement, is, if that's a word, I think it is.
I think it is. We're going
Uh,
to call it a word, and it is now a word.
it is a word. We don't see all the machinations that come together to make this this country is a branding experiment. It is marketing and branding, and how we take a system that is very gross and make it shiny, make it clean, make it new, make it appear harmless, and also make the people who benefit from it appear to be harmless as well. And so then that way you get to just see that clock moving, like, everything's good, everything's fine, except if you're one of uh the little imaginary elves in the back making all of this stuff work together, then you know that it's not. And I think about like Angola Farm in Louisiana is one of the worst places to live on earth. I mean, basically, essentially was a plantation. It still is a plantation. It was based on chattel slavery. Now it's based on prison slavery because none of that ever changed. And so I think about going back to neurodivergence and specifically people who are on the spectrum. um, how many people in there should have been tested for autism, who are on the spectrum, who are gifted individuals, whose the perception of them is ODD. oppositional defiant disorder, which we know is a heavily abused diagnosis when it comes to Black boys and Black girls and adults as well. You know, how many people who have been misdiagnosed with ODD would actually benefit from support with autism? But here's the thing, one of my favorite quotes as a systems thinker by W.E. Deming is a system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets. So here's what we know. We know that prisons have shareholders. We know that if the prison has shareholders, then there are shareholders meetings where the representatives have to go and they have to show how they are going to continue to increase their revenue year over year and project revenue over 10 years. How are they able to do that? How are they able to project revenue? That has nothing to do with crime. Like, that's a separate conversation from crime. Those are two different things. And so when I look at manufacturing and I look at industry, I don't even see that as part of the criminal justice system. I see that as part of the manufacturing and the industrial system and how they go about getting the workers they need. So, how is it that you get people who can go be sent to prison and do this very intricate work that makes their employer money, but they can't get the same jobs outside of prison? So how is that? So it is an enterprise that is set up to continue functioning well into the future, separate from any conversation about crime. So when people start and we talk about prison reform and we talk about diagnoses and support that people need, well, well, who's going to get the bad guys? That is a related conversation, but it is also a separate conversation.
I agree. Again, statistically, the intersectionality of people in prison with a visible disability.
Mm-hmm.
The statistics right now are around 70%.
Hmm.
Most of those identified disabilities land in what is termed cognitive and behavioral.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think you and I agree, if I'm understanding what you were saying very early on in our conversation, that we need to be looking at autism and ADHD outside of the diagnosis categories, because the
Mm-hmm.
diagnoses are based on systems that are fundamentally broken and corrupt.
Absolutely.
So if we can look at ADHD, autism, even something as debilitating as Tourette's can be,
Mm-hmm.
but we look at it from the standpoint of, how does this actually work? How does it actually function?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, oil existed on the planet bubbling out of the ground from the planet's inception. It
Mm-hmm.
took until, the late 1800s for anybody to put it to any reasonable use,
Mm-hmm.
right? Before that, it was black goo and it was gross, and I don't want it on my property, right? When we realized we could light it on fire and do stuff with it, it changed our perception.
Mm-hmm.
So, weird example. I'm known for those, but but
I'm there with you.
until we start looking at people like you and me, at people like your son and my children, and saying there is value because they breathe,
Mm-hmm.
ability because they function in a particular way. We may need to understand how that particular way is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They have value, they function, and they are worth the effort. Until
Yeah.
we can establish those three things, there is no fixing any system.
Right.
And if the Tupperware has holes in it, maybe we use it as a colander, but I'm pretty sure we're throwing it away,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work. We have systems that don't work, and they really don't work for anybody, right? We can pretend as white people that racism doesn't actually hurt us.
Mm-hmm.
We're wrong.
It's very hurtful to you.
Right. If if we don't value every human on this planet,
Hmm.
there is going to be a moment for each one of us, either in our own way or collectively, that it's all going to go terribly wrong.
It's very hurtful to you and very threatening to you. It threatens you in a lot of ways. And I believe there are people who don't even want to, who are just uncomfortable by the I or made uncomfortable by the idea that there's something so threatening looming over them. So it's very delusional kind of behavior and kind of thinking. And I will say though, the systems are working. They're just not working for certain people.
Right. Like you said, they're working as they were designed to work.
Right. So here's the complexity of what we're dealing with. If you come up with this huge idea about how to start getting people tested, early intervention, things like that, you can't do that and walk away and like, oh, I'm doing something wonderful. You now have to figure out how you're going to make those people that money back that they're going to lose from all those people being in prison.
Oh, can we talk a lot more?
Because you can't just take this, you cannot move their cheese like that.
Right, right, right. We we live in a society that is capitalist economics first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to explain what I mean when I say capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is an economic system based on manipulatable supply.
Mm-hmm.
When you can manipulate the supply, you can artificially increase or decrease. We see this, I'll go back to oil, right? We see it with oil. There's enough oil already pumped out of the ground to run us for decades,
Mm-hmm.
but we're still playing with the prices. We're still freezing people, right? It's in the teens outside my
Yeah.
door right now, and I know I have neighbors who may not have oil in their oil tanks,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Because it cost $800 to fill the oil tank last month.
Mm.
And I know there are people in my community that don't have that.
Right.
I don't personally know how to help them other
Right.
than you're welcome to be warm in my home, right? I don't know how to
Right.
help them because I don't have the ability to fix that.
Right. And that's the thing, like it makes us individually, like an individual cannot fix systemic issues. Uh, but, and, I think it's an and, the fact that we are talking about these things in a very different way than we did even 2 years ago, I think that matters. I'd like to believe that that really matters. Because look at the time period that we've been talking, the ideas that we've shared. Some of these things are ideas, some of these things are very actionable. Um, and you have to, we can start to imagine things in a way that we could not imagine them 2 years ago. Like some of the way things function just was a non-issue to so many people who get it now. I think that in itself has value. It's not going to change everything, but also it does open up the possibility, like you can see other people that you can network and connect with, and you understand that it's a community-ish effort because you cannot do it as an individual. And the worst thing is if we don't feel like we're supported enough, that we feel paralyzed as individuals. And it's easy to get frustrated because I get frustrated, but I also all of then out of nowhere there's a new person coming to my lives and they reach out to me and they say, hey, I want to talk to you some more, and can you come and talk on a broadcast on YouTube? And so it's like a thing that builds, and I think that is one reason why the government is pushing back on TikTok, because it is allowing us to connect ideas in a way that we've not been able to connect before.
I agree. I kind of feel like it maybe started with YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
w- we were able to step outside of um, the restrictions of the written word.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Right.
right now
Yes.
in our country, we have so every 4 years. You probably know this, Dr. Douglas, but I don't know that everybody's watching this will know this. Every 4 years, the United States government tests uh, elementary schoolers and middle schoolers for reading, writing, and math
Mm-hmm.
proficiency, and it gives a national report card. And for more than 30 years, that national report card has been reporting that we graduate. So these are the young people who make it to 17 or 18 years old in that broken system. They put on the cap and gown and they walk the stage. Okay. These are
Mm-hmm.
the kids that manage to figure that out and survive somehow. We graduate them 60% functionally illiterate.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
to explain functional illiteracy, it doesn't mean you literally can't read or write anything, but it
Right.
does mean your capacity to function in the writing and reading world is significantly hampered.
Right.
You may not get beyond a soup can and a road sign.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you need to be able to read and analyze text beyond that, or write your needs
Mm-hmm.
in a way that others will understand, that is not skill that was given to you
Right.
in 13 years in the American system. 6 out of every 10 kids.
Mm.
And we've been doing it for decades.
So what that does is it helps. First of all, if we were the powers that be were unhappy with that, that would not be happening. So that's the first thing I think people really need to, I would like for people to really come to terms with. And it helps prop up a narrative about who we are and what we're doing here. It also means that people are more compliant and people are, you can bend people to your will, like, and you can tell them things and they believe it. So this is where we get into talking about critical analysis and being able to discernment and having the wisdom to work through things and challenge authority. They just don't want people to challenge authority. We see it in interactions with police. Is like just comply, just comply, but you're beating me and my body is involuntarily twitching, so I can't just not comply. So like even to that point, people think you just comply, you just do what they say, you do whatever. So and I think what it does is it helps preserve the delusion. The other thing that I think it does is it helps keep all of your power outside of you. So you always have to seek external validation. You have to seek all these sources of power outside of yourself. So if there is one thing that has made me, uh, I think naturally I'm a hopeful person, but that also can go terribly wrong because when it stops, it's like, oh God, I just want to die. But but mostly I'm a hopeful person. Um, but the last few years have given me like moments where it's like, whoa, I didn't realize the world really operated this way. But one thing that adds to that hope is that I hear white people talking about their own healing. So they're talking about things that come from inside of them. And so that lack of that low literacy, the lack of discernment or critical thinking that has been uh, intentionally cultivated, I hear people going inside themselves and saying, no, I need to take time to heal because this is threatening and dangerous to me. And also bringing other people into communities where they can talk about that collective healing and actually showing people what it means to show up in a community. That those are the conversation, like those are the conversations that are actually dismantling. So yes, the head-on approach of we don't like this, we need to change this. That's one way, but another way is to take back your autonomy by saying, I'm going to be literate. I am going to be a critical thinker. I am going to be in charge of my own healing. I'm going to facilitate my own healing. That's a very different conversation than we were having in 2020.
I agree. It's not a concept that I found in my experience ever.
Mm,
Recognizing so uh anti-racism has been part of my life for as long as I can remember.
mhm,
Not done well. I'd like to say that very clearly. Not done
mhm,
well. But it was the way I was raised, um, by people who had very unfortunate ideas about their belief that they were doing it well, right?
mhm,
So these are things that I've been trying to figure out my whole life, and what is
mhm,
my role, my responsibility, my purpose, as a follower of the communities that need assistance, right? Um, my first indication that I needed healing was when I was at the University of Maryland as a student,
mhm,
and I had a moment where something happened that uncovered ideas I had in my head about Black people that to me were very foreign. I didn't
mhm,
recognize myself in that moment. I didn't
mhm,
know those ideas were rattling around in my being because they had been so subtly placed there,
mhm,
so carefully, quietly placed in my being. And, as a very young 20 something who was on fire to be, you know, whatever I could be in equal rights and equitable treatment and all of those
mhm,
things as I understood it in 1991, right? Like
mhm, mhm.
I had to take gigantic steps back
Yeah.
and recognize savior complex. I had to
Mhm,
recognize I had to recognize how the system had carefully brought me up
mhm.
to feel very lovely about myself,
Yes, of course, yes.
as I did almost nothing for
Mhm.
others that they would have wanted.
Yep,
I did a lot, but I
right.
did very little that others would have wanted.
And bringing this full circle with the conversation about neurodivergence, neurodiversity, I think because a lot of us are talking, there are some unique opportunities to just crack the whole thing open. Now, I see plenty of examples of what they call Aspie supremacy and people saying, I'm autistic, I'm a white male autistic, and I'm just brilliant. And, nobody can hold a candle to me. Like, I see lots of that. But I also see people longing for something that they knew from day one was missing. Like, it's almost like an existential crisis or, just a crisis of the spirit where they have known for years, even from being little kids, that something was wrong, and so, because they have hit a wall and they've started to burn out and they can no longer perform the way they used to perform, to make things just kind of run in place and to do all the things where it looks like they're doing all the things, these are opportunities to crack things open and say, wait a minute, like there's some healing I need to do. And it's healing for myself, but also healing in community as well. And I think um, because neurodivergent people, people who have ADHD, complex PTSD, are showing up on these sites and comparing notes, it now For some people, it's personal validation, and that's all it will ever be. But there are some unique openings and opportunities and portals that exist that just did not exist 2 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. Dr. Douglas, we have hit the hour mark and I want to respect your time. I really don't want to stop talking with you, so I hope you
I
will come
know, it's a
back
good
and talk with me
conversation.
some
I
more.
will. I absolutely will.
Thank you. Uh, in the if you have another minute, and I hate to shove this
Sure.
into a minute, but we did talk about posing the question, if there was something that is challenging you and maybe other neurodivergent people as well, that if a support was given would like change everything, right? Total shift in ability to do life, to do your work, to do, is there a thing you could point on and so that you could say, okay, people, let's work on this?
So for me, it's pretty cut and dry because I have paid many costs over the years for walking away from systems that harmed me and my family and trying to run a business. If people can go to my link tree, it's inside my TikTok account, and support my crowdfund, get my books, support my coaching practice, my consulting, support. It there is a huge financial need because you don't decide that you're not going to play the game anymore without any cost, without paying cost for not playing the game anymore. When you flip the Monopoly table, you know.
Yeah. uh, yeah, and as women, and I will not pretend to speak for people of color, but at least
Mhm.
as women, um, we get told to get back to our proper place,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Um, Yesterday and today, I've been dealing with that full on. Um, I run a neurodiversity conference, and that means I need to ask people for money. And when
Yes.
you ask people for money, they feel very welcome to make sure you feel extremely small
Yes. Yes.
and know that they are helping you,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Absolutely.
And when you're a woman with your hand out, that the volume on that goes way up.
Yep.
Um, and so, yes, who's ever watching this, consider uh, making sure that Dr. Douglas can continue her important work.
Yes.
Um, in our current economic system, if we don't have money, we don't eat, we don't have a home, we don't have, right?
No, it
So
doesn't happen.
I know you would do this work whether you made money or not, right?
And I have.
Right, you are, right?
True.
Obviously, right? That's me too. Um, um, but without funds, you can't do it effectively, right?
Well, yeah, and like I have to be kind to my family, right?
Right.
And so, and going back to what you were saying, just get back to your place. So when things get hard, it's like I just need to go get a job. But the idea of sitting through an interview is so soul crushing. And it's like a lot of things I can do, but there's so much more that I can put out into the world when I have room to create and to think and reflect. And one of the things that I'm really good at is helping other people be as good as they want to be and show up in the ways that they want to show up. And I need room outside of an organization to be able to do that.
Right. For one thing, you need to do it in the way that you have learned from your
Yes,
experience
yes,
works
yep,
without uh, an organization and its needs superseding what you know is right.
right, right. Which
So
which
yeah,
understandably would always be the case, but there's room out here to do it and to think and to create and to bring other people up to the level where they desire to be, um, and also to rest and reflect on the work so that the work gets better and better and better.
Oh yeah, that's a whole. Can we do a whole hour on the need for rest?
Yes, let's do that one.
Do a whole hour on
I'm
why
probably
that's
going to
so
mostly
important.
be listening to you because I'm definitely learning that one.
Oh, I was hoping you'd teach me.
But we'll
All
talk
right, we'll
about it
do 15
together.
minutes.
I think we could squeeze out an hour. We'll figure out an hour.
We'll figure it out. All right. Well, Dr. Douglass, my goodness, this has been a privilege. I cannot wait to speak with you again. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time.
I appreciate the opportunity.